Nathan Cole had not held another human being in 3 years. But when he heard the scream tearing through the summer canyon raw, desperate, the sound of a woman who knew she was about to die, his hands moved before his mind could stop them. He grabbed the rope. He tied it around his waist. He went over the edge without looking down. Because, somewhere in the wreckage of everything he had lost, one truth still lived inside him: a man who turns away from that kind of scream never comes back from it. If this story already has you holding your breath, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1878 had been brutal to the Colorado Territory, in the way that only high mountain summers could be heat pressing down from a white sky during the day, cold clawing back in the dark of night, and the kind of silence between those two extremes that made a man hear things he'd spent years trying not to hear. Nathan Cole heard it before he understood what it was. He was 3 miles from his cabin, moving along the Upper Ridge Trail with his horse, a big gray quarter horse named Broker, picking his way slow and deliberate over loose shale the way Nathan had trained him to do. They were heading back from checking the eastern fence line, a task that needed doing every few days since the winter had knocked 3 posts loose and the summer deer had finished the job. Nathan hadn't spoken to another person in 11 days. He knew because he counted. He wasn't proud of counting. He just couldn't stop. Then the scream hit him. It came up from the canyon below the ridge, not a short cry, not the startled yelp of a woman who'd turned an ankle on a root. This was sustained. This was the full-lunged, tearing sound of someone who had already made peace with the worst and was screaming anyway, because the body does not give up even when the mind has. It bounced off the canyon walls and came back twice layered over itself, so that for one disorienting second, Nathan thought there were 2 of them. Broker shied hard to the left. Nathan had him steadied before conscious thought caught up with muscle memory. He swung down from the saddle. He moved to the canyon edge and looked over. She was 20 feet below the rim, both hands locked around the exposed root system of a juniper tree that had spent its whole life growing sideways out of the rock face. The tree was small. The roots were not built for the weight of a grown woman. Nathan could see, even from above, that the outer roots had already pulled free of the rock pale threads of wood curling away from the stone like broken fingers. What was left was maybe 4 roots the diameter of his thumb, and they were bending. She was looking up at him. Her face was white. Not pale white, the color of a woman who had already felt the blood leave her extremities, whose body was directing every remaining resource toward the hands that were the only thing between her and a 300-foot drop. "Help me," she said. The voice was steady. That surprised him more than anything else, steadier than he expected from a woman in that position. Like she was making a reasonable request at a reasonable volume and simply needed him to act on it. Nathan did not waste time asking how she got there. He turned back to Broker, pulled the lasso from the saddle horn, checked the length by feel, 60 feet plenty, and doubled it back on itself for strength. He tied one end to Broker's saddle ring with a knot that his brother had taught him when Nathan was 12 years old, and Daniel was 14, standing in the barn at their father's ranch in Wyoming, saying, "If you're ever going to tie your life to something, learn to do it right." He hadn't thought about Daniel in 2 days. That was longer than usual. He knotted the other end around his own waist, pulled it tight enough to feel in his ribs, and looked at Broker. "Don't you move," he said. Broker pinned his ears but held. Nathan went over the edge. The rock face was not vertical. It angled outward slightly, which was the only reason the juniper had managed to grow there at all, and the only reason Nathan could make progress without free-hanging. He went down on his boot heels, leaning back against the rope tension, walking the face the way he'd been taught to descend a steep slope. Not scrambling, not rushing, just controlled steps. Weight back. Let the rope do what the rope was built to do. She watched him come down. She didn't make a sound. When he was level with her, he saw her face clearly for the first time and understood the steadiness in her voice. She was scared out of her mind. Her jaw was locked. She was holding herself together by an act of will so concentrated it had burned through the panic and come out the other side into something colder and more functional. A woman who had decided that if she was going to survive this, she could not afford to fall apart. He respected that without finding words for it. "I'm going to get my arm around you," he said. "When I do, let go of the root with your right hand and grab my belt. Not my arm. My belt. You understand?" She looked at the distance between them, maybe 2 feet. "You need to get closer," she said. "Working on it." He walked 2 more steps sideways across the face boot, finding purchase on a ledge no wider than 3 inches, the rope pulled taut at an angle. He felt it in his lower back, not pain yet, just pressure, the body cataloging the situation. "Your horse," she said. "He'll hold." "He's 16 hands if he's an inch. If he decides to walk forward, he won't." "You sound very sure of an animal." "I've had him 8 years. I'm sure of very few things in this world, ma'am, and he's one of them. Can we talk about something else?" A sound came out of her that was almost, not quite, but almost a short, disbelieving laugh. Under the circumstances, he found that extraordinary. "You're funny for a man dangling off a cliff," she said. "I'm not dangling. I'm descending with intention." He moved the last foot across the face. His shoulder was 6 inches from hers. "Right hand. My belt. Now." She let go of the root with her right hand. The juniper shuddered. 2 more pale root threads snapped, and the tree sagged left. Her whole body lurched, and her left hand white-knuckled the remaining roots so hard he heard her knuckles crack. Her right hand found his belt. Her grip was ferocious. He expected that. "Left hand," he said. "If I let go with my left hand, the tree goes." "The tree is going anyway. Left hand. Come to me." She looked at him for one long moment. Really looked at him the way a person looks at a stranger when they are deciding whether to bet their life on him. He had been looked at that way before. He had never found a way to make it easier. Then she let go. The juniper tree tore free from the rock face and fell without a sound into the canyon below, 300 feet of silence. Before Nathan heard the distant crash of it hitting the valley floor, her weight hit him at the same moment, both arms around his neck, her whole body swinging in against his, and he took the impact with his knees bent and his left hand slapping hard against the rock face to kill the pendulum swing of them. The rope bit into his waist like a brand. His left palm opened on the rock. He registered the warmth of blood on his hand and filed it away for later. "I have you," he said. She said nothing. Her face was pressed against the side of his neck, and he could feel how hard she was breathing, not crying, not yet just breathing, the body taking in oxygen as fast as it could after a long period of rationing it. "Can you get your feet on the rock?" he said. "Yes." She shifted her weight. Her boots found the face. "Yes, I have it. We're going to walk up. Follow my feet. Same pace." "All right." They went up slowly. Broker had not moved an inch. When Nathan's hands cleared the rim, he reached back and took her forearm and pulled her up beside him, and they both sat down on the shale of the ridge trail, and neither of them spoke for a full minute. The canyon wind came up the face and hit them both. Nathan looked at his left hand, a long, shallow cut across the palm already clotting. He wiped it on his trouser leg. She was looking at him. "Why?" she said. He looked up. "Why did you do that?" she said. "You don't know me. You rode over to an edge and went down a cliff face for a stranger." He thought about it for a moment, not because the answer was complicated, but because he'd learned over the years that giving the true answer too fast made people think he was being glib. "Because I heard you," he said, "and I couldn't unhear it." She stared at him. "That's not an answer," she said. "It's the only one I've got, ma'am." She let out a long, shaking breath and pressed both hands flat against her thighs. Her dress was torn at the left shoulder, where she must have caught on something during the fall. Her hair had come half down from whatever arrangement it had started the day in. There was a cut above her left eyebrow, a thin line of dried blood tracking down to her cheekbone. "Clara," she said. "Clara Whitmore." "Nathan Cole." "Mr. Cole." She looked at the canyon, looked back at him. The stagecoach went off the trail, half a mile east of here. The axle gave way on a curve, and the whole thing went sideways. The driver and the other passengers managed to get clear before it went over. I had gone to the canyon side to look at the view, and when the coach went, I was already too close to the edge. She stopped. I caught the tree on the way down. Lucky. Lucky. She said the word like she was testing its weight and finding it insufficient. Yes, I suppose that's one word for it. She stood up. Unsteady for a moment, then she caught herself. No hand reached out for help. He noticed she braced with her own legs and found her balance on her own. "The others will be looking for me," she said. "Town of Harlan's Crossing is 4 miles northeast. If they made it down the mountain, that's where they'd go. Can you take me there?" He looked at Broker. Looked at the sky. The sun had moved west. 2 hours of good light left, maybe 3. "I can take you to my cabin first," he said. "Get that cut seen to. Rest the horse an hour. Then I'll ride you down." She looked at the cut on his hand. "Your hand needs looking at as well," she said. "It's fine. It's bleeding through your trouser leg." He looked down. She was right. He'd wiped it harder than he thought. "It's fine," he said again. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. Not gratitude. He'd seen plenty of gratitude, and it generally came with tears and grasping and effusiveness. This was something more evaluating than that. Like she was making a second decision about him having made the first one at the cliff face and found it to be correct. "All right, Mr. Cole," she said. "Lead the way." He helped her up onto Broker's back and led the horse by the reins back along the ridge trail toward the cabin. She rode in silence behind him. He walked in silence ahead. The canyon wind followed them for a while, and then dropped as they moved away from the rim into the shelter of the pines. Nathan had not brought a person to his cabin in over 2 years. He told himself it was just because she was injured and the town was 4 miles away, and it was the practical thing to do. He told himself that while he walked with his cut hand wrapped in his bandana, and the sound of Broker's hooves steady on the trail, and the weight of another human presence at his back. He mostly believed it. The cabin was built into the side of a granite slope, half hidden by a stand of aspen that had grown up around it in the years since Nathan had stopped cutting them back. It wasn't that he'd decided to let the aspens grow. It was that somewhere along the line he'd stopped bothering to cut them down. There was a difference, though. He'd stopped asking himself what the difference meant. Clara looked at it when it came into view and said nothing. He unsaddled Broker and put him in the small corral, gave him grain and water, and when he came inside she had already found the basin and the water pitcher, and was cleaning the cut above her eyebrow with a competence that suggested she'd cleaned cuts before and didn't need instruction. "First aid kit," he said, and pointed to the shelf above the stove. "I see it." She reached up and got it down. He watched her work for a moment, then sat down at the table and unwrapped the bandana from his hand. The cut was longer than he'd thought, not deep, but the palm had opened cleanly enough to need binding. She crossed the room, sat down across from him, and set the kit between them. "Give me your hand," she said. "I can manage." "You cannot manage the palm of your own hand with your other hand, Mr. Cole. Give it to me." He held it out. She took it with both of hers, practical grip fingers, holding his wrist steady, not tentative, not delicate, and examined the cut. "Clean," she said. "Didn't go deep. You need it wrapped tightly, or it'll keep bleeding every time you close your fist." "I know." "Then let me wrap it." She did. He watched her face while she worked, which he recognized as rude, and did anyway. She was concentrating the same focused expression she'd had hanging on the cliff, the face of a person who manages difficulty by shrinking the problem down to what can actually be addressed. The cut, the bandage, the knot. Next thing. "You're not from this territory," he said. "Missouri," she said without looking up. "Kansas City." "Long way to travel alone." "I wasn't supposed to be alone. There was a teaching position, a town called Sterling further west." She tied off the bandage. "The school that offered me the position and the man who ran it are apparently no longer in agreement, and by the time I found that out, I was already 2 weeks into the territory with my savings spent on the ticket." "So you're traveling on." She looked up then. I'm figuring it out, she said. One day at a time. He thought he understood something about that. The school situation, he said. The man who ran it, did he know you were coming? He invited me. I have the letter. She said it flat, no emotion, the way people talk about things that have moved past the stage of being able to hurt them into the stage of just being facts. It appears he expected a different kind of teacher. What kind did you turn out to be? She looked at him steadily. The kind with opinions, she said. He almost smiled. He caught it just before it broke through, but she saw it anyway. He could tell by the slight shift in her expression, the smallest loosening around her eyes. You should eat something, he said. If you're going to make it to Harlan's Crossing tonight. I don't want to put you out. You're not putting me out. He got up and went to the stove. He had venison stew left from 2 nights ago. He put it on the heat. He found bread that was still good, and he cut it, and he poured 2 tin cups of coffee from the pot he kept on the back of the stove through most of the day. He put food in front of her. She ate without performance, without comment on the quality, without the slightly theatrical gratitude that some people use to fill silence. She was hungry, and she ate, and she drank the coffee, and when she was done, she set the cup down. You live up here alone, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, he said. How long? He thought about it. 3 years this October. Before that, he wrapped both hands around his own cup. The bandaged one pulled slightly. Before that doesn't matter much for the purposes of tonight. She looked at him for a moment. Fair enough, she said, and she left it. He had expected her to push. People generally pushed, and then he would close up, and then there would be an uncomfortable silence, and then the conversation would be over. She didn't push. She folded the edge of her napkin into a neat crease and left the question where he had put it and moved on. The stagecoach line will be liable, she said. For the accident. Most likely. The driver, he should have known that curve, that trail. He probably did know it. Summer thaw does things to the trail conditions year to year. An axle can be fine on the way up and gone on the way back. Does anyone maintain that trail? The county's supposed to. Whether they do is another question. She nodded slowly, thinking. He could see her working through it, the practicalities, the next steps, what this meant for her timeline and her money and her plans. She was not sitting in the aftermath of almost dying. She was already moving forward through it. Like the dying part had been dealt with, and now there was the living part to sort out. There's a land office in Harlan's Crossing, he said. If you're looking for a new position, there's also a church, a general store, a schoolhouse. I don't know if the schoolhouse has a teacher. She looked up. You think there might be a position there? I don't know. I'm just telling you what's in the town. She looked down at the table. Do people in Harlan's Crossing? She stopped, started again differently. Is it a decent town? He thought about what honest meant in this context. It's a regular town, he said. Which means some people are decent and some people are complicated and some people are neither. Same as every town. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be reassuring. It was meant to be accurate. She looked at him, and this time the thing in her expression was something warmer than evaluation. Something closer to recognition. I appreciate accurate, she said. Good. He stood up and began clearing the plates. We should head down in about 20 minutes. You'll want to be in town before full dark. They rode down the mountain with her behind him in the saddle, and because the trail was narrow and the horse needed watching, Nathan had an excuse to face forward and not talk. He was grateful for the excuse. He was also aware, with the particular awareness of a man who has spent 3 years nearly alone, that her hands were resting lightly at his waist for balance, and that this was the closest he had been to another human being in a very long time, and that his body registered this fact with an insistence he found inconvenient. He focused on the trail. Harlan's Crossing came into view as the last light hit the tops of the western peaks, a scattering of lit windows in the valley, the main street straight and predictable, the sound of it floating up to them on the evening air. He felt her straighten behind him as she saw it. There it is, she said quietly. There it is. He felt her take a breath. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Nathan." A pause. "Nathan." Like she was trying the word out. "I don't know how to thank you properly." "You don't need to. A man went over a cliff face for me today." "I know. I was there." She made that almost laugh sound again, and he felt it against his shoulder blade, the brief quiet vibration of it, and tucked that feeling somewhere he wasn't going to look at for a while. "I mean it," she said. "I owe you my life. That's not a small thing to sit with." "No," he agreed. "It isn't. And yet you seem perfectly comfortable with it." "I'm not comfortable with much," he said. "But some things just are what they are." They rode in silence the rest of the way down. He took her to the livery stable, where the stage driver and two of the other passengers were still talking to the stable owner and a man who turned out to be the town sheriff. When they saw Clara come through the door, there was a moment of the kind of relieved commotion that Nathan generally tried to avoid: raised voices, rushed questions, a woman passenger bursting into tears and grabbing Clara's hands. Nathan stayed back by the door. Clara answered questions for a few minutes. Yes, she was all right. Yes, she had fallen. Yes, this man had helped her. At the word helped, she turned her head and looked at Nathan across the crowded stable, and the look was specific in a way that the word helped was not. The sheriff came over. "Nathan Cole," the man said. He was younger than Nathan by a decade, dark-haired with an honest face. "Didn't expect to see you in town." "I don't come down much," Nathan said. "I heard. What happened up there?" "Stagecoach went over on the canyon curve. She fell to the cliff face. I happened to be on the ridge." "You went down after her?" "Yes." The sheriff looked at him for a moment. "That was a brave thing," he said. Nathan didn't answer. He was watching Clara across the stable, watching her reassure the weeping woman. Answer the driver's questions, maintain her composure through all of it with the same deliberate steadiness she'd shown on the cliff. There was something in it that he couldn't name, and kept not being able to look away from. "She going to be all right?" the sheriff asked. "She's fine," Nathan said. "She was fine 20 minutes after I pulled her up. Cleaner head than most people I've known." The sheriff followed his gaze. "She's passing through," he asked. "Looking for work, teaching. Don't know if the schoolhouse has an opening." "Huh." The sheriff looked thoughtful. "Funny you should say that. Mrs. Garrett left for Denver 3 weeks ago. We haven't had anybody in that schoolhouse since." Nathan said nothing. Across the stable, Clara was extricating herself from the group with the same focused efficiency with which she did everything else. She crossed toward them, and when she reached Nathan, she stopped and looked at him directly in the way he was beginning to recognize as simply how she did things. No looking away, no softening approach. "The sheriff tells me you're something of a legend up on that mountain," she said. "The sheriff has a generous definition of legend," Nathan said. "He says you haven't come to town in 6 months." "I came today." "You came today," she agreed. There was something in the way she said it. Not pressing, just noting. He picked up his hat from where he'd set it on a fence post. "You'll be all right from here," he said. "The hotel's 2 buildings east. Tell them." "Nathan." He stopped. She held out her hand. Not to shake, she held it out palm up and offering the way you'd offer something back to someone. He looked at it. "Thank you," she said. "For going over that edge. Most men wouldn't have." He took her hand and shook it once. Her grip was firm, dry. The grip of a woman who had spent the afternoon hanging above a 300-foot drop and was still standing straight. "Most men," he said, "haven't got my particular reason." She looked at him. "What reason is that?" He thought about Daniel, about a barn in Wyoming and a knot that his brother had taught him, and the quiet specific weight of a debt that could not be paid to the person it was owed to, only forward to the next person who needed it. "Good night, Miss Whitmore," he said. He put his hat on and walked out of the stable into the blue mountain dark. He rode back up to the cabin alone. He unsaddled Broker and put him up for the night and went inside and sat at the table where 2 cups had been sitting 2 hours ago. One of them still had a 1/4 inch of coffee in the bottom. He looked at it for a while. He wasn't comfortable. He wasn't at peace. He wasn't any of the things he'd constructed 3 years of solitude to approximate. But somewhere inside the structure of everything he'd built to keep himself from feeling something had shifted. Not broken open, not resolved, just shifted like a door that had been sealed so long you forgot it was a door moving fractionally on its hinges, in a wind from somewhere you hadn't expected. He put the cup in the basin. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to the mountain, which was the same as it always was. Vast, indifferent, steady, the kind of silence that had once felt like punishment, and now just tonight, for reasons he wasn't ready to examine, felt fractionally less like that. He stared at the ceiling. Most men wouldn't have. He closed his eyes. He didn't sleep for a long time. He didn't go back to town the next day. He told himself there was no reason to. He had fences to check, and a horse with a loose shoe that needed attending, and a section of roof over the back corner of the cabin that had been meaning to buckle since April, and hadn't buckled yet, but would. There was always enough on a mountain property to fill a day if a man was determined to fill it, and Nathan Cole had spent 3 years being very determined about that particular task. He checked the fence. He reshoed the horse. He got halfway up the ladder to look at the roof section and then stood on the rungs for a long moment, looking northeast toward the valley where Harlan's Crossing sat in the morning haze, and then he climbed back down and put the ladder away. He was not going to town. He was not going to town because Clara Whitmore was not his business. She had survived the canyon. She was in a hotel. She had money enough for a room, or the sheriff would have seen to it the man had an honest face, and honest men saw to things like that. She was fine. She was more than fine. She was the most self-possessed woman he had encountered in a long time, possibly ever, and she did not need Nathan Cole descending from his mountain to check on her like she was a fence post that might be loose. He went inside and made coffee, and sat at the table, and looked at the place where her cup had been. He got up, washed both cups, and put them on the shelf. On the 3rd day, he went to town for supplies. He told himself this was also not about Clara Whitmore. He needed flour and salt and lamp oil, and the fact that these supplies were not yet critical was simply him being organized and forward-thinking, which was a quality a man living alone in the mountains needed to cultivate. Harlan's Crossing, in the full heat of a July morning, was loud in the specific way of a working frontier town. Hammers somewhere, horses, a woman calling to someone across the street, the bell over the general store door. Nathan tied Broker at the hitching post in front of Callaway's General and went inside and started on his list. He was debating between 2 grades of lamp oil when he heard her voice. Not to him. She wasn't speaking to him. She was 2 aisles over, and she was speaking to the man behind the counter, and the tone of what he heard coming from that direction made him put down the lamp oil and walk quietly to the end of the aisle where he could see around the shelf without being seen. Clara was standing at the counter. She had a paper in her hand, a letter or a notice of some kind, and she was holding it with the controlled stillness of a woman who was containing something considerable. The man behind the counter was not Callaway. He was a thick-necked man in his 50s with a vest that cost more than it should have out here, and the specific expression of someone who was used to being agreed with. The position, he was saying, has been filled. The position was offered to me by letter 6 weeks ago, Clara said, by the school board, of which I understand you are chairman. Circumstances change. Mr. Hale. Her voice was even, precise. The voice she had used on the cliff face. I have traveled over 600 miles for this position. I have the letter of offer in my hand. I would like to understand what circumstances have changed sufficiently to invalidate a written offer. We found someone more suitable, Hale said. A silence. More suitable, Clara repeated. The families of this town have certain expectations of a schoolteacher. Someone settled. Someone established in the community. I see. She set the letter down on the counter with a deliberateness that was quieter and more controlled than slamming it would have been. And the fact that I am a woman traveling alone is the circumstance that changed. Hale's expression didn't shift. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." She picked the letter back up and folded it once precisely and put it in her coat pocket. "I would like the refund of my travel deposit as specified in the letter's terms." That deposit covered administrative costs. The letter specifies a full refund if the position is withdrawn before commencement. "I have a copy. I assume the school board has a copy. I am happy to take the matter to the territorial circuit judge if necessary." She paused. "I have time, Mr. Hale. I have nothing but time right now." Hale's face did something complicated. Nathan stepped around the end of the aisle. He didn't plan it. He had not decided to do it. His feet moved, and then he was standing in the open space between the shelves and the counter, and both of them looked at him, and he said nothing for a moment, because he was figuring out what exactly he was doing here. "Nathan Cole," Hale said. The tone shifted, not friendly, but careful. The way men spoke to other men, they couldn't quite place and weren't sure of yet. "Hale," Nathan said. Clara looked at him. Her expression did not change, did not soften into relief, or harden into anything else. She simply looked at him the way she looked at everything steady and clear, and then looked back at Hale. "Mr. Hale," Nathan said, "I believe Miss Whitmore mentioned the circuit judge." "I heard her. Judge Alderman comes through in September. He has a long memory and a strong opinion about contract law." Nathan set his hands on the counter, easy, unhurried. "And he went to school with my father, so I know this about him personally." This was not entirely untrue. Judge Alderman had gone to school with Nathan's father. Nathan had met the man twice and could not claim any particular influence over him. But Hale did not know that, and the particular way Nathan said personally left room for Hale to imagine whatever he needed to. Hale looked at Nathan for a long moment. "The deposit is $12, he said finally. "The letter specifies 15, Clara said. Another pause. Hale opened the register and counted out $15 and set it on the counter. Clara picked it up, counted it herself without any attempt to appear like she wasn't counting it, and put it in her coat pocket alongside the letter. "Thank you, Mr. Hale," she said. She walked out of the store. Nathan collected his flour and salt and lamp oil, paid Calloway's wife, who had materialized behind the register during the last part of the exchange, and followed. Clara was standing just outside the door. She turned when she heard him. "You didn't need to do that," she said. "I know. I had it handled. I know that too." She looked at him. "Then why?" He settled his supplies against the hitching post and looked back at her. "Because Hale's the kind of man who changes his mind faster when there's a witness. And I was already in the store." She studied his face for a moment, looking for something in it. He didn't know if she found it. "The position is gone," she said, "regardless of the deposit." "I heard." "So I'm in a town I didn't plan to be in with $15 more than I had 10 minutes ago and no particular plan." She said it factually, without self-pity, the way she'd said everything factual since he'd met her. "Not exactly the arrival I was hoping for." "The schoolhouse," Nathan said. "The one on Mill Street. You know it doesn't currently have a teacher." She looked at him slowly. "The sheriff mentioned something," she said. "That schoolhouse belongs to the town, not to Hale's school board. Different arrangement. Town council runs it." He picked up his supplies. "The council head is a woman named Ida Marsh. She's not Hale." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. He thought about it. "Because you traveled 600 miles, he said, "and you almost died on the way. Seems like you ought to at least get a fair shot at what you came for." She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she said, "Where does Ida Marsh live?" "Jadim." He didn't go with her to find Ida Marsh. That wasn't his place, and he knew it, and Clara did not ask him to. She got directions from the sheriff's deputy and walked off down the street with the same purposeful stride she'd used to cross a stable in the aftermath of nearly dying, and Nathan loaded his supplies onto Broker and told himself he was done here, and went to the feed store because he actually did need grain. He was at the feed store for 20 minutes. He was walking Broker to the water trough when he heard his name called, and it was the Sheriff Hayes. His name was Walt Hayes, coming across the street toward him, with the expression of a man who had information he wasn't sure what to do with. "Cole," Hayes said, "you hear about the Sutton claim?" Nathan looked at him. "What about it?" Hayes pulled up beside him, dropped his voice slightly. "Sutton's been telling people he's got water rights to the Eastern Creek, the one that runs through the valley below your fence line." Nathan was still. "Sutton doesn't have water rights to that creek," he said. "That creek predates his claim by 30 years. It's open water." "He's got a document," Hayes said. "Filed it with the land office 2 weeks ago. Claims it was a territorial grant, 1861. I've got no grounds to contest it yet. The land office accepted it on face value." "A territorial grant from 1861 would be in the Federal Archive," Nathan said. "That's what I'd expect." "Has anyone checked the Federal Archive?" "I sent a letter," Hayes said. "It'll be 3 weeks before I hear back if I hear back. Meanwhile, Sutton's talking about putting a gate on the creek access at the Valley Junction, which would affect your property and the Hendersons and the Garza family's summer grazing." Nathan looked at the water trough. Broker drank steadily, unconcerned. "How long has Sutton been in this territory?" he said. 8 months. Came in from Nevada Territory." "Nevada Territory." Nathan said it slowly. "Where there was a water rights fraud scheme that ran for 4 years before it got prosecuted." Hayes looked at him. "How do you know about that?" "Because my brother worked cattle drives through Nevada in 72 and 73, and he wrote me about it." He paused. "The men who ran that scheme filed false territorial grants. Same pattern." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "I can't act on that without evidence," he said. "I know." Nathan took Broker's reins. "I'm going to need to make some inquiries." "Nathan!" Hayes put a hand briefly on his arm, not grabbing just contact the way men who respected each other communicated. "Don't do anything that gives Sutton a reason to file against you." "I'm not going to do anything," Nathan said. "I'm going to find out what's true. There's a difference." He rode out of town with his supplies and his flour and his lamp oil and the particular kind of cold anger that lived in the chest cavity, the kind that did not heat up or spill over, but simply sat there and burned steadily. The kind he knew from experience was more dangerous than the hot kind because it lasted longer. He was most of the way back up the mountain when he realized he had not found out whether Clara Whitmore had found Ida Marsh or what had come of it if she had. He turned around. He told himself he was going back to ask Hayes about the Federal Archive procedure. He rode back into town and went to the sheriff's office and asked Hayes one question about Federal Archive procedure, which took 45 seconds, and then he walked out and directly to the church hall where Ida Marsh was known to hold her community council meetings on Tuesday afternoons, and it was Tuesday afternoon, and he was not going to examine this behavior very carefully. He heard them before he reached the door. 2 women's voices, one dry and practical that he recognized as Ida Marsh's, and one that he was beginning to know as well as he knew the creek sound outside his cabin window. "Cannot pay you what the school board was offering," Ida was saying. "I want to be direct about that. The town budget for the schoolhouse is $40 a month and a place to live." "What kind of place?" Clara's voice. "Decent. It's the old Henderson house. 2 rooms, solid roof-working stove. Mrs. Henderson's daughter moved her to Denver last year, and the town's been maintaining it since." $40, Clara said. "And the house. And the town's goodwill, which I know sounds abstract, but in a place this size it matters more than you'd think." A pause. Nathan stayed outside the door. "Mr. Hale," Clara said. "What about him?" "He runs the school board. He'll be Margaret." Ida's voice had something in it that wasn't quite sharpness, but was related to it. "I have been running this town's civic interests since before Garrett Hale arrived here, and I will be running them after he leaves. He does not operate the town schoolhouse. I do. You'd be answerable to me and to the parents of your students and to no one else." Another pause. Longer. "I'll need to see the house," Clara said. Of course. And I'll want to review the current student's progression before I agree to a curriculum. You'll find it more behind than you'd like, Ida said. Miss Garrett was competent, but she was stretched thin. How many students? 14, ages 6 to 15. 14. A brief silence. All right, Mrs. Marsh, show me the house. Nathan stepped away from the door before it opened and was 15 feet down the boardwalk, looking at nothing in particular when they came out. He heard Ida Marsh say something, and Clara respond, and then a pause in the voices, and then Clara's footsteps coming toward him. He turned around. She stopped 4 feet away, looked at him. "Were you listening?" she said. "I was nearby," he said. Nearby and listening. I wanted to know if it went well. She looked at him for a moment, that evaluating look, the second decision look. Then something in her expression shifted into something warmer, almost amused, but still careful, still held back. "It went well," she said. "Good. $40 a month and a house." Ida Marsh is a fair woman. She is. Clara glanced back at Ida, who was waiting with the patience of someone who had been doing civic work long enough to understand that important conversations took the time they took. Then she looked back at Nathan. "You came back to town." "I had a question for the sheriff." "About what?" He hesitated for less than a second. "Water rights." Something shifted in her face, not quite concern, but attention. The specific attention of a person who has just noticed that someone else is carrying something. "Is there trouble?" "There might be, for some of the Valley families. Including you." "My property's affected." She looked at him steadily. "Is that something you can handle?" she said. He looked at her. "It's something I'm going to handle," he said. "There's a difference." The corner of her mouth moved, just barely. "I believe I've heard that distinction before," she said. He almost smiled. He held on to it. "Enjoy the house, Miss Whitmore." "Clara," she said. He stopped. "You said Nathan," she said. "I said fair enough. The same should apply the other direction." He stood there for a moment. "Clara," he said. She gave him a single nod, decisive, settled like a thing decided, and turned back to Ida Marsh. He walked back to Broker. He stood for a moment with his hand on the horse's neck, not going anywhere, just standing. Broker turned his head and looked at him. "Don't," Nathan said. He rode back up the mountain. The next 2 weeks moved in the particular rhythm of a high mountain summer, long bright days that started cold and ended warm afternoons with thunderstorms that came up fast and went fast. Nights that were absolute and clear and full of the kind of stars that made the sky seem closer than it was. Nathan worked. He repaired the roof section. He restrung 2 sections of east fence. He rebuilt a section of stone wall along the creek where the spring runoff had undermined the base. He did all of this with the focused physical application of a man who understood that the body's tiredness was useful, that it was easier to sleep when the muscles had been used easier to keep the mind from going places. It shouldn't go when the hands had been busy all day. He was also systematically and carefully building a file on Gerald Sutton. He wrote letters. He wrote to the Federal Land Archive in Washington requesting records from 1861 regarding territorial water grants in Colorado Territory. He wrote to the Territorial Land Office in Denver requesting copies of recent filings. He wrote to a man he knew slightly, a former cattle drive associate named Reeves, who now worked in property law in Denver, asking about the Nevada Territory water fraud scheme and the names associated with it. He did not tell anyone in town he was doing this. He did not want Sutton to know anyone was looking. Men who filed false documents did one of 2 things: when they felt observed, they ran, or they accelerated whatever they were planning. Nathan needed time. He went to town twice in those 2 weeks, both times for legitimate supplies. Both times he saw Clara. The first time was 3 days after she'd moved into the Henderson house. He was passing the schoolhouse, and the door was open, and he could hear her inside, and he stopped involuntarily, because what he heard was not what he expected. He had expected teaching recitations, the flat declarative instruction of lesson repetition. What he heard instead was argument, not conflict. Argument in the old sense, voices going back and forth. A girl's voice rising in frustration. Clara's voice calm underneath it, asking a question rather than providing an answer. A boy's voice cutting in. Clara redirecting without flattening either of them. He stood outside the door for 2 minutes listening. Then he walked on because standing outside a schoolhouse door was not something a grown man could do indefinitely without it becoming strange. The second time he saw her was at Callaway's General 6 days later. She was buying chalk and paper and a thing he didn't recognize until she told him it was a protractor, a measuring tool for geometry, which apparently she had promised to teach the older students, and which apparently required considerable advocacy with herself before Ida Marsh approved the expenditure. Geometry, he said. Practical geometry, she said. Land measurement, surveying principles, how to calculate the area of a piece of property from reference points. He looked at her. In a territory where land fraud is a real and current problem, she said, knowing how to calculate what you own seems useful. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You heard about Sutton." "Small town," she said. "And Ida Marsh talks freely to people she trusts." "She trusts you already." "She trusts people who show up and do the work." Clara set the protractor on the counter. "Is it as bad as people are saying?" "I don't know what people are saying." "They're saying he's going to close the creek access by August, that it'll affect the summer grazing for 3 families in the valley." "That's possible." "What are you doing about it?" He looked at her, inquiring. She looked back at him. "Nathan." "What?" "That's not enough of an answer, and you know it." He picked up his lamp oil. "I'm building a legal case. It takes time. I need the Federal Archive records before anything can move." "How long?" 3 weeks from when I sent the letter. Maybe 4. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, the Henderson family. He looked at her. "What about them?" "Mrs. Henderson's family has been in this territory for 30 years. She might have records. Property records, water records, correspondence from the early days." Clara looked at him. "I'm living in her house. I've been writing to her daughter in Denver about repairs. I could ask." He stared at her. "You've been writing to the Henderson daughter," he said. "She's the property owner. It seemed courteous to keep her informed about the condition of the house. And you think she might have records from 1861. I think a family that has held land in this territory for 30 years almost certainly kept records. Whether any of them survived the move to Denver is a different question." She paused. "Do you want me to ask?" He was still for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I do." She nodded once, picked up her chalk and paper and protractor. Then she stopped. "Nathan," she said. He looked up. "The Henderson property borders the Eastern Creek." He went still. "If Sutton's water claim is fraudulent," she said carefully, "and if the Henderson family has records proving the creek was open water before 1861, that's not just evidence. That's standing. The Henderson family could file a counterclaim." He looked at her for a long moment. The thing he felt was not quite surprise. He had understood, within 3 days of knowing her, that her mind worked faster and more laterally than most people he'd encountered. But this was something specific, and it landed with specific weight. "You just laid out a legal strategy," he said. "I taught myself contract law from a borrowed book," she said, "in Kansas City, because the man who ran the school I worked for kept changing the terms of my employment, and I needed to understand what he could and couldn't do." A brief pause. "Knowledge is not always acquired in the places people expect." He looked at her. She looked back. "Clara?" he said. "Yes." "Write the letter to the Henderson daughter." "I already did," she said. "Yesterday. I just wanted to know if you agreed before I told you." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Is that—" she started. "No," he said. "No, it's not a problem. It's the right move." He shook his head slightly. "You already sent it." The situation seemed urgent, she said. There was something in her voice, not quite apology, not quite defiance, something between them. I should have consulted you first. You didn't know you were working on my side until just now. I knew, she said quietly. I knew whose side I was working on. A silence came between them, different from the other silences, not the silence of two strangers who didn't know each other's rhythms yet, but the silence of two people who were beginning to know them and were noticing that they did. Nathan picked up his supplies. Thank you, he said. You're welcome. She turned toward the door, then stopped. Come for supper Friday, she said, without turning around. I'm cooking for Ida and her husband. One more person won't change the quantities. She walked out. He stood at the counter. Calloway's wife was watching him from behind the register with the particular expression of a woman who ran a general store in a small town, and therefore knew approximately everything about the nature of human beings. You going to go, she said. He picked up his lamp oil. I'll see about Friday, he said. He went on Friday. He told himself this was because Ida Marsh was going to be there, and Ida was a member of the town council, and the town council's goodwill was not irrelevant to the water rights situation. He told himself this through saddling Broker and riding down the mountain and tying up outside the Henderson house and knocking on the door that Clara opened with flour on the back of her left hand and an expression that was surprised for exactly 1 second before it settled back into the look he was coming to know as simply her. You came, she said. I said I'd see about Friday, he said. You did say that. She stepped back. Come in. He came in. The house smelled like food and wood smoke, and something he couldn't identify at first, and then it smelled like a home. Not his cabin, which smelled like a man who lived alone. A home in the way a place smells when a person who cares about where they are has put time and intention into it. He sat at the table with Ida Marsh and her husband Frank, and he ate Clara's cooking, which was good in a way that surprised him, because he wasn't sure what he'd expected, and he answered Frank Marsh's questions about the mountain property with the patience of a man who understood that the questions were friendly rather than prying. Ida talked about the school. Clara talked about the Henderson family records the daughter had already written back, she said 3 days faster than expected. And yes, there were records, and yes, she would send them. He looked at Clara when she said this. She was looking at her plate. 3 days, he said. She was prompt, Clara said. How long ago did you actually send that letter? She looked up. There was something in her face that was almost but not quite entirely suppressed. Before we spoke at the store, she said. He stared at her. The situation seemed urgent, he said. Yes, you mentioned that. Are you angry? He thought about it. No, he said. No, I'm not. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at her plate and served herself more potatoes, calm and deliberate. Ida Marsh looked at Frank Marsh across the table. Frank Marsh looked at his fork. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Frank said, Beautiful summer we're having. And the table started talking again. Nathan rode home that night with the window of the summer dark open all around him and the stars above the mountain doing what they always did, and the cold anger about Sutton's claim still burning in his chest, the way it had been for 2 weeks. But now, something else alongside it, something he had not felt in a long time. Something that did not have a simple name, something that had to do with a woman who sent letters before she told you about them, and taught geometry to frontier children, and bargained her travel deposit back with the precise voice she'd used hanging above a 300-foot drop. He rode home. He went inside. He sat at the table, and this time, there were not 2 cups, there was only one, his own, the one he always used, and he sat with that for a while. Then he got up and took a second cup off the shelf. He didn't put coffee in it. He just set it there on the table beside his own. He looked at the 2 cups for a moment. He went to bed. He slept better than he had in 3 years. The Henderson records arrived on a Thursday in a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with kitchen string addressed to Clara Whitmore in the careful handwriting of a woman who had learned to write when paper was expensive and every letter counted. Clara sent word up the mountain the same afternoon. She gave the note to the deputy's youngest son, who made the ride for 10 cents and the promise of a peppermint from the jar on Calloway's counter, and Nathan came down the following morning before most of the town had finished their first cup of coffee. She had the records spread across the kitchen table when he arrived. Not scattered, organized. Grouped by date, oldest to newest, with a folded piece of paper marking each group that she had written a summary on in her precise, economical hand. He stood in the doorway and looked at the table for a moment. "You sorted them," he said. "Last night," she said. "Sit down. There's coffee." He sat. She put coffee in front of him and sat across the table and turned one of the grouped stacks toward him. 1858 through 1862, she said. The Henderson family arrived in Colorado Territory in the spring of 1858. Jonas Henderson filed his land claim in June of that year. The creek is mentioned in the original filing as a boundary marker, open water, no rights claimed available to adjacent landholders. She tapped the paper. That's 1858. Sutton's document claims a territorial grant from 1861. But if the creek was documented as open water in the original 1858 filing, then a 1861 grant would contradict existing record, Nathan said. And would require explanation, Clara said. Either the territorial government overrode the original filing, which would require documentation in the Federal Archive, which I've requested, or, she said, the 1861 document is fabricated. Nathan looked at the stack of records. His coffee sat untouched. "There's more," she said. She turned another stack toward him. These papers were different, softer, more worn, the ink faded to brown. "Letters," she said. Jonas Henderson was a meticulous correspondent. He wrote to his brother in Ohio every month for 30 years. His daughter found the returned letters after Jonas died. The brother had kept every one. She paused. In August of 1861, Jonas wrote about a meeting with a territorial surveyor, a man who came through the valley offering to file water rights documentation on behalf of local landholders. Jonas wrote, "She found the letter, opened it carefully, and read, 'A Mr. Carver came to the valley claiming to be a territorial surveyor from Denver City. He proposed to file water rights on our behalf for a fee of $20 per claim. I declined, finding his papers not in order and his manner too eager for an honest man.'" Nathan was very still. "A Mr. Carver," he said. "Yes." Clara set the letter down. "And the man Reeves wrote to you about the Nevada Territory water fraud case. The man who ran the scheme." Nathan looked at her. "What was his name?" she said. "Carver," he said quietly. "Thomas Carver." The kitchen was silent. "He didn't get Jonas Henderson," Clara said. "But if he filed false documents on behalf of people who did pay him documents, they may not have understood were fraudulent. Those documents could surface 20 years later," Nathan said, "in the hands of someone who knew how to use them." "Someone who bought them," Clara said, "or stole them, or inherited them." She paused. "Where did Gerald Sutton come from before Nevada?" Nathan looked at her. "I don't know," he said, "but I'm going to find out." He was already reaching for the letter. She let him take it. He read the whole thing slowly, the way he read anything important, not moving through it, but staying with each line until it was fully absorbed. She watched him read. She had learned in the 3 weeks since he had started coming down from the mountain with regularity that surprised them both that Nathan Cole read the way he did everything completely without performance, without any gap between the thing and his attention to it. When he finished, he set the letter down. "I need to ride to Denver," he said. She looked at him. "The Federal Archive." "A letter takes 3 weeks. A man takes 3 days each direction. If Sutton is moving to gate the creek by August..." He stopped. "I need to go myself." "When?" "Tomorrow morning." A pause. She looked at the table. "How long will you be gone?" "A week, maybe 10 days." She nodded slowly. She wasn't looking at him. "Clara," he said. She looked up. "The records need to stay here," he said. "Locked. Don't tell anyone about them. If Sutton has someone watching..." "I understand," she said. "I'm not..." He stopped. I know you understand. I'm saying it anyway. She looked at him for a moment. Because you're careful. Because the last time someone had documents that threatened a man like this, he said, the documents had an accident. She was quiet. Then, you've seen this before. My brother worked Nevada in '72, he said. I told you that. You told me he died, she said carefully. Nathan picked up his coffee. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. The cattle drive story, she said. It was not quite a question. He set the cup down. Daniel died on a cattle drive, he said. That part is true. What I haven't said is that the drive was contracted by a land company that turned out to be fraudulent. They hired drovers at good wages, ran them through dangerous country, and when the cattle reached market, the company dissolved, and the men were paid in worthless paper. He stopped. Daniel argued about it, loudly to the wrong people. 3 days later, there was an accident on the trail. A pause so small it was almost not there. The foreman said it was a rock slide. Clara did not speak. I don't know if it was a rock slide, Nathan said. She looked at him across the table, at the thing in his face that he was showing her the way a person shows a scar, not for sympathy, but because it was there, and it was real, and they had decided the other person could be trusted to see it. Nathan, she said. I don't want to talk more about it right now, he said. I just wanted you to understand why I'm careful about documents. I understand, she said, and she left it. She did not reach across the table. She did not offer the kind of consolation that would have required him to manage her response to his grief, rather than simply sit with the grief. She left it where he put it, and she stayed present, which was more than most people managed. He stood up after a moment. I'll be back in 10 days, he said. If anything happens with Sutton while I'm gone... Hayes, she said. I'll go to Hayes. Good. He picked up his hat. And Ida. Ida Marsh has standing with the town council. If Sutton tries to move on the creek access before I'm back, Ida can call an emergency council session. I'll talk to Ida tonight. He nodded. He was at the door when she said his name. He stopped. Come back, she said. Very simply, not be safe or be careful. Just come back. He turned and looked at her standing at the kitchen table, with her hands resting on the Henderson records, her face doing what her face did, steady and clear, and not hiding the thing behind the words. Yes, he said. He left. He was gone 9 days. Clara taught school. She taught 14 children the names of rivers and the calculation of angles and the history of the territory they lived in, and she did it with the same focus she brought to everything, and on most days it was enough to occupy the part of her mind that wanted to track the days since Nathan had ridden south toward Denver. She talked to Ida the night he left. Ida listened with the full attention of a woman who had been managing civic problems for 20 years, asked 3 precise questions, and said she would handle the council. On the 4th day, Gerald Sutton came to the schoolhouse. Clara was alone. The children had gone home an hour before. She was grading arithmetic slates when she heard the door and looked up and found a man standing in the doorway she did not recognize, but understood immediately. He was broad through the shoulders, well dressed for the territory, with the particular easiness of a man who was accustomed to his own authority, and wore it like a coat he never took off. He looked at the schoolroom with the mild curiosity of someone surveying property. Miss Whitmore, he said. Mr. Sutton, she said. He registered the fact that she knew his name without a flicker. You know who I am. Small town, she said. She did not stand up. He came into the room, looked at the slates on her desk, looked at the map on the wall she had drawn it herself, the territory the creek system marked in blue chalk. Nice map, he said. Thank you. Accurate. As accurate as I can make it, she said. I used the land office survey records. He looked at the creek lines. She watched him look at them. I understand you've recently received some correspondence, he said. His voice was pleasant, unhurried. From Denver. Clara's hands did not move on the slates. I receive correspondence regularly, she said. "I'm a teacher. Parents write. Former colleagues write. It's a common feature of the profession." "Of course." He turned from the map, looked at her directly. "I'm thinking of a specific package. Brown paper. Arrived Thursday." She looked at him. "I'm not sure what package you mean," she said. He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "Miss Whitmore, I'm going to be straightforward with you because I think you're an intelligent woman, and I don't enjoy wasting either of our time. Nathan Cole has been making inquiries into my water claim. I know this because men who file papers leave tracks, and I've been watching the tracks." He paused. "I don't have any quarrel with you. You're new here. You've built something decent in a short time, and the town likes you. It would be a shame to complicate that." She looked at him steadily. "Is that a threat, Mr. Sutton?" "It's an observation," he said. "People who involve themselves in disputes that aren't theirs tend to find the disputes become theirs. That's all I'm saying." She set down her chalk. "Mr. Sutton," she said, "I teach children. I have papers to grade and a curriculum to plan, and 14 students who are counting on me to be here every morning. I have no involvement in water rights disputes and no interest in acquiring any." She paused. "Is there something I can help you with today?" He looked at her for a long moment. Reading her, she let him read. "No," he said finally. "I don't believe there is." He tipped his hat, the gesture almost courteous almost, and left. Clara sat very still for a full minute after the door closed. Then she got up, crossed to the window, and watched him walk up the street. Watched where he went. He went into the hotel, which meant he was staying in town, which meant he was not going back to his claim property tonight. She went to Ida Marsh's house. She told Ida everything. Every word as precisely as she could reconstruct it. Ida listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Clara had come to value most about the woman. She did not hurry information. "He knows about the package," Ida said when Clara finished. "He said brown paper arrived Thursday," Clara said. "He knows what day it arrived, which means either someone at the post office told him or he has someone watching." "Fitch," Ida said. The word was flat. "The postmaster." "He's been in Sutton's pocket since February. I didn't know the extent of it until now." Ida stood up. "The records." "They're in the house, hidden." "How hidden?" "Hidden enough that a man searching casually would not find them." Clara paused. "Hidden enough that a man searching thoroughly might." Ida looked at her. "We need to move them." "Where?" Ida thought for exactly 3 seconds. "Frank's feed store. There's a strong box in the back that's been in my family for 30 years. Only Frank and I have a key." Clara nodded. "Tonight." "Tonight?" Ida agreed. After dark. They moved the records at 10 o'clock at night, wrapped in an old quilt, carried 2 blocks to the feed store in the specific kind of quiet that a small town settles into after 9. Ida unlocked the strong box, and Clara placed the Henderson records inside, and Ida locked it again, and they walked back in silence. At the door of the Henderson house, Ida stopped. "Nathan comes back when?" she said. 3 days, Clara said. "If he's on schedule." Ida looked at her, not the measuring look of a woman sizing up a stranger, but the direct look of a woman who already knew what she thought and was confirming it. "He's a good man," Ida said. "He's been up on that mountain a long time, and that's been a waste, but he's a good man." Clara said nothing. "Don't let him go back up the mountain indefinitely," Ida said. "That's all I'll say about it." She went inside. Clara stood in the dark for a moment. She went inside too. Nathan came back on the 8th day instead of the 9th. Clara was at the schoolhouse when she heard brokers' hooves on the main street, and she recognized the rhythm of them. She hadn't known she'd learned that rhythm, but she had, and she went to the window. He looked tired in the specific way of a man who has ridden hard and slept poorly and is running on the fuel of a thing that needed doing. He was scanning the street as he rode the way a man does when he's been away, and is taking the measure of whether anything changed while he was gone. His eyes found the schoolhouse window. He tipped his hat. She went back to her students. He came to the Henderson house that evening after supper, as she'd expected he would. He came with a leather satchel that had not been with him when he left, and he sat at the table and opened it and spread out what he'd brought. Federal Archive records. Official paper government seal the dense formal text of territorial documentation. There is no water rights grant from 1861 in the Federal Archive, he said. Not for this valley. Not anywhere in Colorado Territory under the name Carver, not under the name Sutton, not under any variant spelling the archivist could find. He set a paper in front of her. That is a signed statement from the territorial archivist attesting to the absence of any such document. She looked at it, looked at him. His document is fabricated, completely. He pulled out another paper. And this is a letter from a territorial judge in Denver, Judge Alderman, who it turns out does actually remember my father. When I explained what was happening here and showed him the Jonas Henderson letter, he wrote a formal notice. He set it on the table. It orders the Harlan's Crossing Land Office to suspend the Sutton filing pending investigation. Sutton cannot gate the creek. He cannot exercise any claimed rights, not until the investigation concludes. Clara looked at the papers, all of it. The work of 9 days of hard writing and harder arguing laid out on a kitchen table in a house that had once belonged to a family that a man named Carver had tried to defraud 20 years ago. "Nathan," she said, "there's more." He was not done. He pulled out a third document, a letter, this one handwritten on the letterhead of a law office. "Reeves, the man I know in Denver. He found the Nevada Territory case records. Thomas Carver was convicted in 1875. He served 3 years and was released in 1878. This year," Clara said. "This year. And the man who bought Carver's fraudulent documents when Carver went to prison." Nathan set down the letter. His name was Gerald Sutton. Clara stared at him. "Sutton bought the documents from Carver's estate sale," Nathan said. "Paid almost nothing for them because no one else knew what they were. Then he waited. He waited 3 years for Carver to get out of prison. When Carver was released this spring, Sutton came to Colorado and filed the claim. Why wait for Carver? Because if the claim was ever challenged, Sutton needed Carver. Carver was the one who knew the territorial system, who knew how to make a false document hold up under initial scrutiny. Sutton had the papers. Carver had the knowledge. Nathan paused. "Carver is here, Clara. He arrived in the territory 2 weeks ago. He's been staying at a ranch property 12 miles east of Harlan's Crossing." The kitchen was very quiet. "Sutton came to the schoolhouse," Clara said. Nathan's face changed. "When, 4 days ago, while you were gone." He was very still. "What did he say?" She told him. Every word the same way she'd told Ida. Nathan listened the way he always listened, fully, without interruption, and the thing that happened in his face while she talked was not anger exactly, but something harder and colder than anger, the steady burning thing she was coming to recognize. "He knows about the records," Nathan said. "We moved them. Ida's strongbox." He looked at her. "Ida and I moved them the same night, after I saw that he knew about the package." She paused. "Was that the right call?" He let out a breath. "Yes, that was exactly the right call." He looked at the table. "He's escalating. The visit to you, that was a warning, which means he knows the investigation is coming." "How?" "Someone at the Denver Land Office, or he had someone watching the archive." Nathan stood up. "I need to get these documents to Hayes tonight. I'll come with you." "You don't—" "Nathan." She stood up too. "He came to my schoolhouse. He sat in the room where I teach children, and he told me to stay out of it." She looked at him evenly. "I have been in this since before you went to Denver. I am not staying in this house while you go to the sheriff." He looked at her for a long moment. The thing in his face was complicated. Not resistance. Not quite. Something more like the specific difficulty of a man who has spent 3 years managing danger alone and is recalibrating. "All right," he said. They walked to the sheriff's office together. Hayes was still there working late over paperwork, and he looked up when they came in with something in his expression that sharpened when he saw Nathan's satchel. "Tell me you got something," Hayes said. "I got everything," Nathan said, and laid it out on the desk. Hayes read slowly. Nathan stood. Clara sat in the chair beside the desk and watched Hayes's face move through the document's skepticism to interest, to the particular expression of a lawman who has been waiting for something to become actionable and is watching it become actionable in real time. When he finished, he looked up. "This is enough," he said. "The judge's notice alone is enough to pull the filing." With the archive statement and the Nevada connection, he stopped. "Where is Sutton now?" "Hotel," Clara said. "He was there 4 days ago." Hayes stood up. "I'll check tonight. If he's still in town, I want to serve him the suspension notice before morning." He looked at Nathan. "Carver. 12 miles east. I can give you the property description. I'll need a deputy and a warrant. The warrant will take until morning." Hayes looked at both of them. "Go home. Both of you. Let me work." Nathan nodded. They walked back up the main street in the dark side by side. The town was quiet around them, a few lit windows, the sound of something from the saloon, the steady night sounds that Clara had learned in 3 weeks to recognize as normal and reassuring. Halfway to the Henderson house, Nathan stopped. She stopped beside him. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "When I was in Denver," he said. "When I was in the archive, I found Daniel's name." She looked at him. "There was a file on the Nevada Territory case. Reeves had access to the investigative record. Daniel's name was in it." He stopped. "As a witness. There had been an investigation into the cattle drive company before Daniel died. He had given a statement to a territorial investigator 3 weeks before the rock slide." Clara was very still. "He knew they were coming for him," Nathan said. His voice was steady. The steadiness of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and is choosing right now to set part of it down. "He gave the statement anyway." "Nathan," she said quietly, "I spent 3 years believing I should have been there, that if I had gone on that drive with him, things would have been different." He looked at the dark street. "The investigator's record says Daniel specifically asked his brother not to come, said it was too dangerous." A pause. "He was protecting me." Clara did not speak. "He didn't die because of negligence or bad luck or my absence," Nathan said. "He died because he was the kind of man who told the truth when it would have been easier and safer not to." He stopped. "And I have spent 3 years on a mountain being angry at myself for something he chose." The night air moved between them. "He sounds," Clara said carefully, "like someone worth grieving." "Yes," Nathan said. "He was." She did not reach for his arm or his hand. She stood beside him in the dark, the way she had learned to stand present, not pressing, giving the grief its actual dimensions without trying to reduce it. And he stood beside her, the way he was learning to stand, not alone, not managed, just present with another person in the specific weight of the thing. They stood there for a little while. Then Nathan said, "It's late." "Yes," she said. "You should go in." "You should sleep," she said. "You've been riding for 9 days." "I'll sleep." He looked at her. In the dark, his face was hard to read, but she had learned to read it in conditions of difficulty. "Clara." "Yes." "Thank you," he said. "For the records, for Ida, for not staying in the house when I went to Hayes." He paused. "For being someone I could tell that to. What I just told you." She looked at him for a moment. "You told me because you're ready to," she said. "Not because of me." "Both things can be true," he said. She looked at him. The thing that happened in her chest was something she had been noticing for 2 weeks and naming carefully and setting aside each time to be examined later, because she was not a woman who acted on things before she understood them. She understood this one. She had understood it for a while. She was choosing when, not whether. "Good night, Nathan," she said. "Good night." She went inside. He stood on the street for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the livery. Behind the door of the Henderson house, Clara stood in the dark entry and pressed her back against the wood and breathed. In 6 weeks, she had come 2,000 feet down a canyon cliff face in a stranger's arms and landed in a town that wasn't the one she'd come for. And somewhere in the space between those two things, she had stopped being a woman passing through and started being a woman who was here. Who had a table and a strongbox key and 14 students and a map she had drawn herself on a schoolroom wall. And a man who had gone 9 days to Denver to fight for a creek. She pushed off the door and went to light the lamp. Across town in Hayes's office, the sheriff was putting on his hat and loading his pistol and going to check whether Gerald Sutton was still in the hotel. And 12 miles east, in the dark of a rented ranch property, a man named Carver, who had spent 3 years in a Nevada prison, was sleeping without any knowledge that the careful structure of what he thought he'd gotten away with was coming apart at every seam. And on the main street of Harlan's Crossing, Colorado Territory, the summer of 1878, Nathan Cole walked to the livery and put up his horse and found himself doing something he had not done voluntarily in 3 years. He was looking forward to tomorrow. Hayes found Sutton in the hotel dining room at 9:30 that night, eating supper like a man with no particular concerns, and served him the suspension notice between the soup course and the bread. Clara heard about it the next morning from Ida, who had heard it from Frank, who had heard it from the deputy who'd gone with Hayes. The way Sutton received the notice was the part people kept repeating. He took the paper, read it without any visible change in expression, folded it once, and put it in his breast pocket. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He finished his supper. That was the part that worried Nathan most. He told Clara this when he came to the schoolhouse at noon, standing in the doorway while her students ate their lunches outside. He had been to see Hayes that morning, and his face had the particular set of a man who has received information he is still working through. A man who argues is a man who thinks he can still fight the thing directly, he said. A man who folds the paper and eats his bread is a man who's already moved to the next plan. What's the next plan? Clara said. That's what I don't know. She looked at him. Where is he now? Checked out of the hotel this morning. His horse is gone. He left town. His horse is gone, Nathan repeated. That's not the same thing. She understood the distinction. She nodded. Carver, she said. Hayes rode out this morning with the deputy. The ranch property was empty. Carver cleared out sometime in the night. Clara was quiet for a moment. Outside, she could hear her students talking, the sound of 14 young voices carrying in the summer heat. They knew, she said. They knew before Hayes moved, which means someone told them. Nathan looked at his hands. The same someone who told Sutton about the brown paper package. Fitch, Clara said. Probably. Hayes is dealing with that separately. He looked up. I need you to be careful, Clara. I know you understand that already. I'm saying it anyway. I know you are, she said, and I know why. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, I'm going to ride the eastern perimeter. If Sutton's moving on the creek access without the legal filing, I'll see the evidence of it. He can't gate that creek without equipment and men. You're not going alone, she said. I'm not asking anyone to. Nathan. She said his name the way she said everything that mattered plainly without softening it into a request when it was actually a statement. You are not riding out alone to look for 2 men who already know you're the one who went to Denver. He looked at her. Take Hayes, she said. Or Frank. Or both. A pause. She could see him weigh at the instinct toward solitude that 3 years had built into muscle memory and the newer thing that had been building alongside it these past weeks. Hayes has his hands full with Fitch, he said. Frank then. Another pause. Frank Marsh is 61 years old. Frank Marsh was a cavalry scout for 8 years, and you know it. She crossed her arms. Ida told me. Nathan looked at the ceiling briefly. All right, he said. Frank. Today, she said. Today. He agreed. He left. She watched him go from the schoolhouse window, and then she turned back to the room and called her students in from lunch, and she spent the afternoon teaching long division with one part of her mind, and tracking the sound of the street outside with another part. Nothing happened that afternoon. Nothing happened that evening. The nothing felt deliberate. Frank Marsh came back at dusk with Nathan and a piece of information that changed everything. Clara heard the horses and came to the door of the Henderson house and looked at their faces and knew before either of them spoke that what they had found was not good. "Come in," she said. They came in. Nathan sat at the table. Frank stood, which was a thing men did when what they had to say made sitting feel wrong. "The Eastern Creek Junction," Nathan said. "Someone has already been there. In the last 2 days, there are fresh post holes, 6 of them spaced for a gate. No posts, yet no gate, but the holes are dug." "He's prepared," Clara said. "He's more than prepared." Nathan looked at the table. "Frank, tell her." Frank Marsh was a big man, gone slightly soft at the middle, with a face that had been in the Colorado sun for 30 years and showed every year of it. He had the eyes of someone who had seen considerable things and had organized them into a hierarchy by importance. "When I was riding the north side," he said, "I cut a track. Wagon track, heavy loaded, headed northeast, not toward town, toward the Jensen Pass." Clara thought. "Jensen Pass goes to Silver Creek," Frank said, "where the new mining camp is. About 60 men up there right now, most of them temporary labor men who'll work for cash and don't ask about the particulars." Nathan said, "He's hiring men." "He's already hired them," Frank said. "The wagon tracks were going out, not in. Whatever he brought to the camp, he brought it in the last day or two. Equipment, cash, supplies for a crew." He paused. "A man who's given up doesn't set up a labor camp." The kitchen was quiet. "He can't gate the creek legally," Clara said slowly. "He knows the filing is suspended. He knows Nathan brought back the archive records. He knows a judge in Denver has been briefed." She looked at Nathan. "So he's going to do it without the law." "Gate it by force," Nathan said. "With enough hired men that the town can't easily stop him. And once the physical gate is in place and the creek access is blocked, the burden shifts," Clara said. "The Valley families have to fight to open it instead of him having to prove he can close it." Nathan looked at her. "That's right," he said. "He's changing the ground. If he can get that gate in and hold it for even 2 weeks, the Hendersons and the Garzas and the rest of them start losing summer grazing. Livestock start dying, and a judge in Denver is 3 days away." He paused. "By the time legal relief arrives, the damage is done." Frank put his hat on. "I'll get Hayes." "Get Hayes and tell him to get every able man he can reach tonight," Nathan said. "We need to be at that junction before dawn." Frank left. The door closed. Clara stood at the kitchen table. Nathan was still sitting, but his hands were moving not nervously deliberately the way his hands moved when he was thinking through logistics. "How many men do you think Sutton has?" she said. "If he pulled from the Silver Creek camp, could be 20. Could be more." "Hayes can get maybe 8, she said. "Counting you." 9, Nathan said. She looked at him. "Nathan." 9 men on the right ground is enough, he said. "The junction is a natural choke point, one approach. He can't bring 20 men through at once." He stopped. "And we have something Sutton doesn't." "What?" "The creek isn't just my property. It borders the Henderson claim, the Garza claim, 3 other families. If those families show up, it's not a land dispute anymore. It's a community." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Who's going to ask them?" He looked at her. She was already reaching for her coat. "I know where the Garza family lives," she said. "Maria Garza's son Tomas is one of my students. I know where the Hendersons' neighbor, the Birch family, lives because their daughter Emma told me last week they were worried about the creek." She put her coat on. "You have logistics to plan with Hayes. I'll get the families." "Clara, it's dark. I have a horse," she said. "I can ride. Ida taught me the valley roads in my first week because she said every woman in this territory should know how to get somewhere in the dark if she needed to." She looked at him directly. "Let me do what I can do, Nathan." He stood up. He was a full head taller than her, and he looked at her in the particular way he had that was not about height at all, the way of a man who was seeing someone clearly. 3 farms, he said. The Garzas, the Birch family, and the Hendersons' cousin who lives on the South Road, his name is Pete Callahan. He's got 2 grown sons. I'll find them, she said. Take the lantern from the back shelf, and take the bay mare from the livery. Tell Sam I said so. All right. She was at the door when he said her name. She stopped. He crossed the room in 3 steps and took both of her hands in his. Not the practical grip she had given him on the cliff face. Not a handshake, but the grip of a man holding something he was not willing to drop. Come back, he said. She looked at him. He had said those 2 words to her once before. She had given them back to him. Now he was returning them with an emphasis that was not about the logistics of tonight. Yes, she said. She went. The night was clear and warm, the summer dark alive with cricket sound, and the smell of dry grass, and the distant mountains holding their positions against a sky thick with stars. Clara rode the valley roads with the lantern swinging from the saddle horn, and her heart moving at a controlled pace that she maintained by focusing on the task 1 step at a time, the way she managed everything that might otherwise be overwhelming. The Garzas first, because Tomas had told her where they lived, and she was confident of the road. She found the farm by the light in the window and knocked, and waited. And when Maria Garza came to the door, with a look of someone prepared for bad news, Clara gave her the facts in order without drama, and watched the woman's face move through them. How many men does Sutton have? Maria asked. We don't know exactly. Enough that we need every family who has a stake in that creek. Maria turned and called into the house, and within 4 minutes, her husband and her 2 oldest sons were pulling on boots. The Birch family took 7 minutes. Emma's father, a rangy man named Cord, who had the reputation of someone who didn't get riled easily and didn't back down once he was listened to. Clara with his arms crossed, and then uncrossed his arms and said, I'll get my rifle. Pete Callahan answered the door himself, took 1 look at Clara on horseback, with a lantern at 9 o'clock at night and said, Is it the creek? Yes, she said. My boys are already up, he said. We saw the wagon tracks day before yesterday. Been waiting to see what it meant. He was already stepping off the porch. How many men has Hayes got? Getting more now? Clara said. Good. Tell him Pete Callahan and 2 sons are coming down the South Road and not to shoot us by mistake. She rode back toward a town. The lantern cut the dark ahead of her. She was halfway back when she heard hooves coming fast from the direction of the creek junction and pulled the mare to the side of the road. Hayes came around the bend with Nathan beside him and Frank Marsh behind, and when Nathan saw Clara, he pulled Broker up short and looked at her in the specific way he had on nights that mattered. Families, he said. All 3, she said. The Garzas, Birch, and Callahan with 2 sons, coming down their respective roads now. Hayes let out a breath. That's 17 with my men. He looked at Nathan. Better ground than I thought. Tell your deputy to watch the South Road, Nathan said. Callahan's coming that way. Don't want a misidentification. Hayes was already turning his horse. Move in 20 minutes, he said. Everyone at the junction. He rode ahead. Frank followed. Nathan stayed. He pulled Broker alongside the mare, and for a moment they were side by side in the dark, close enough that she could have put her hand on his arm without reaching. You got all 3, he said. I got all 3, she said. He looked at her. The lantern light was low and warm between them. When this is over, he said. She looked at him. When this is over, he said again. He stopped. He was a man who chose words the way he chose rope for strength, not abundance, and right now he was finding that the words he needed were ones he hadn't used in a long time, and wasn't sure he still had access to. Nathan, she said. I know, he said. I know it's not the moment. It is the moment, she said. It's exactly the moment. Say it. He looked at her in the dark. I don't want you to leave, he said. This town. I don't want you to... I have been climbing that mountain and coming back down for 3 years, and it never mattered which direction I was going. It matters now." He stopped. "It matters because of you. I want you to know that before I ride into whatever tonight is." She held his gaze. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I told you that when you went to Denver. You said you'd be here when I got back." "I meant permanently," she said. "I thought that was clear." He stared at her. "It wasn't entirely clear," he said. "Nathan." She said his name with the patience of a woman who had considerable patience and was using most of it. "I drew a map of this valley on my schoolroom wall. I planted herbs in the window box of the Henderson house. I ordered 7 new arithmetic books from a publisher in St. Louis." She paused. "I don't do those things in places I'm not staying." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you do." The sound of Hayes's men moving reached them from up the road. "Go," she said. "Come back whole." "Stay in town," he said. "Not a request." "I know," she said. "I know what I can do and what I can't. Go." He went. She sat on the mare in the dark and watched him ride toward the creek junction, and she breathed steadily and deliberately and told herself that 17 men on the right ground against 20 hired hands was good odds, and she believed this because she had to. They held the junction for 4 hours. Sutton's men came at 2 in the morning, not 2023, hired from the Silver Creek camp, with promises of $2 a day and no questions asked. They came with wagon loads of post materials and a gate frame already built, intending to work fast in the dark, and have the structure in place before daylight made witnesses possible. What they found instead was 17 men who knew that ground and had chosen their positions and were not moving. Clara heard it later in pieces from Nathan and Hayes and Cord Birch separately, and assembled it the way she assembled most things from the component parts into a whole. There was no shooting. This was the fact she came back to most often when she turned it over in her mind, that in a situation with that many armed men and that much at stake, no one fired a shot. Hayes read the judge's notice aloud in the dark by lantern light and told Sutton's crew they were engaged in contempt of a federal court order. Most of the Silver Creek men, who had signed on for a fencing job and not a federal crime, looked at each other and began to calculate whether $2 a day was worth a court case. It wasn't. They left in stages. First the outer crew, then the wagon drivers, and finally the core of Sutton's hired men, until what remained in the dark by the creek junction was Nathan Cole and Walt Hayes, and 15 valley men standing around a gate frame that had never been assembled in a field where 6 post holes had been dug, but would never hold posts. Sutton himself was not there. He had sent his men and stayed back. This was the thing that nagged Nathan all the way back to town, riding in the gray hour before dawn with Frank Marsh beside him and the sound of the creek running free in the ravine below. "He didn't come," Nathan said. Frank said, "Smart men send others." "Smart men also know when to run," Nathan said. Frank looked at him. "You think he's already gone? I think a man who folds his paper at supper and checks out of his hotel without argument is a man who has thought about every outcome in advance." Nathan was right. Hayes found Sutton's trail the next morning northeast toward the territorial border, moving fast. He sent a telegraph to the next county sheriff and another to the territorial marshal's office in Denver. The warrants were filed by noon. Whether Sutton was caught was now the territory's business. He was no longer Harlan's Crossing's problem. Thomas Carver was arrested 2 counties over 5 days later, still carrying the original fraudulent documents in a saddlebag. The territorial marshal sent Hayes a notice of the arrest and a receipt for the documents, which were to be held as evidence. The creek junction stayed open. Y'all, the town celebrated in the way that small towns celebrate, not with ceremony, but with accumulation, small kindnesses compounding over days. Maria Garza brought a pot of tamales to the schoolhouse. Cord Birch fixed the broken fence post at the side of the Henderson house that Clara had mentioned needing attention. Pete Callahan's wife showed up with a jar of preserved peaches and the information that her husband considered Nathan Cole a man of sound judgment, which from Pete Callahan was considered high praise. Nathan came to supper 3 nights running. He did not announce this pattern. He simply came and Clara set a plate for him, and they ate at the table where the Henderson records had been spread out and were no longer there, and they talked. They talked the way people talk when they have been through something together, and the something has clarified what was already being built between them easily, without performance, without the careful calibration of early acquaintance. They talked about Daniel some nights, about Clara's years in Kansas City, the school where she had worked, and the slow, grinding frustration of being told who she was allowed to be. About Nathan's father's ranch in Wyoming, the mountains there, the difference between those mountains and these ones. About the students, Clara talked about them with the specific individual affection of a teacher who saw each child as a separate person, and Nathan listened with the particular attention of a man who had been without the company of people for long enough to find the details of lives extraordinary. On the 4th night, Nathan didn't come. Clara noticed his absence by the way she noticed sounds she'd learned by what was missing. She ate alone and told herself this was nothing, that the man had a property to run, and fences to maintain, and a horse to care for, and that a pattern of 3 dinners did not constitute an obligation. She was washing the plates when she heard the knock. She opened the door. He was standing on the step, and he had not come from the stable. She could tell because he was not in his work clothes, but in the better shirt he wore to town, and he had his hat in his hands instead of on his head, and there was something in his face that was different from the thing she was used to seeing there. It was the face of a man who had decided something. "I'm late," he said. "I ate already," she said. "I know. I'm sorry." He was turning the hat brim in his hands, not nervously, but with the specific manual occupation of a man who needs his hands to be doing something when the rest of him is doing something harder. "I needed to think first." She stepped back from the door. He came in. They stood in the kitchen, and she did not offer to reheat supper, and he did not sit down. "I built that cabin up there to disappear into," he said. "I want you to know that I know that. I didn't go up the mountain to be solitary. I went up to be gone. There's a difference. A man who wants solitude tends his fence line and comes to town for a drink on Saturday. A man who wants to be gone lets the aspen grow up around his windows." He stopped. "I let the aspen grow." "I know," she said. "What I didn't know," he said, "is that being gone for 3 years doesn't actually take you anywhere. You're still there. The grief is still there. The thing I couldn't fix about Daniel is still there." He looked at her. "And then I heard a scream in a canyon, and it turned out the thing I couldn't fix about Daniel was the exact thing I needed in order to go over that edge." She held very still. "If I hadn't been carrying that debt," he said, "I might have stood at the rim and calculated the risk like a sensible man. I went over the edge because I wasn't calculating. I was paying something I owed." He set his hat on the table. "But what happened after the coming back? The supper, Denver, the junction?" He shook his head slightly. "That wasn't debt. That was something else entirely." She looked at him. "Clara," he said. "Yes," she said. "I would like to stop coming to supper and going back up the mountain," he said. "I would like to." He stopped. "I am not good at this. I want you to know that I know I'm not good at this. I have been alone for 3 years, and before that I was a cattleman on a mountain, and I did not have occasion to practice." He picked up his hat and put it down again. "What I mean is that I would like to court you, properly, if that is something you would permit." She looked at him for a long moment. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." "You have been coming to supper for 2 weeks." "I know." "You held my hands in the street and told me you didn't want me to leave." "I know." "You went to Denver and came back, and the first thing you did was come here." She paused. "What do you think courting is?" He stared at her. "I believe," she said carefully, "that you have been courting me since approximately the night you set a second cup on your table and didn't put coffee in it." He looked at her for a long moment. Calloway's wife told you about the cup, he said. Calloway's wife tells everyone everything, Clara said. It's a small town. Something happened in his face that she had seen in pieces before. The almost smile, the caught laugh, the specific warmth of a man who finds the world surprising in a way that is not painful. But this time, it didn't stop halfway. This time, it broke through full and real, and changed his whole face, and Clara looked at it and thought, there it is. There is the man who has been in there the whole time. So, he said. So, she agreed. I don't need to ask permission. You have had it, she said, for some time. He crossed the kitchen. He took her face in both hands, the way she had taken his injured hand, careful and certain, like something worth being careful with, and he kissed her, and she kissed him back with the same directness she brought to everything that mattered. When they stopped, he rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to need to cut the aspen back, he said. Let some light in. She laughed. The real kind, the kind she hadn't used in a long time, either, the kind that came from somewhere below deliberate. Yes, she said. You are. He held her face for another moment. Then he stepped back and picked up his hat and looked around the kitchen of the Henderson house, the herbs in the window box, the arithmetic books stacked on the side shelf, the map she had drawn rolled up by the door to be taken back to the schoolhouse in the morning. 7 arithmetic books, he said. From St. Louis, she said. They'll arrive in October. Expensive. They're excellent books. He looked at her. October, he said. October, she confirmed. He put his hat on. I'll see you tomorrow, he said. You will, she said. He left. She stood in the kitchen and listened to the sound of him going. Brokers' hooves on the packed dirt of the street fading toward the mountain road, and she pressed both hands flat on the table where they had eaten supper 4 nights out of the last 4, and she breathed. Outside, the summer night of Colorado Territory went on doing what it had been doing all along the creek in the ravine. Running free, the stars steady overhead, the mountain holding its position against the dark, the way it had for 1,000 years, and would for 1,000 more. And on the road going up, Nathan Cole rode home to a cabin with aspen growing up around the windows, already thinking about where to start cutting them back. He started cutting the aspen the following Saturday. Clara didn't know about it until Ida Marsh mentioned it at the end of the week with the particular casualness Ida used when she was conveying something she considered significant but did not want to appear to be conveying significantly. Frank rode past the Cole property yesterday, Ida said. They were sitting at Ida's kitchen table with tea, which was their Friday afternoon arrangement, now the kind of arrangement that had established itself without either of them proposing it formally. Said it looks like someone's been doing considerable clearing work around the cabin. Clara looked at her cup. Is that so? She said. Frank said he could see the windows from the road, Ida said. Apparently you couldn't before. Clara took a sip of tea. Good, she said. Ida said nothing. She had the gift, which Clara had come to deeply appreciate, of knowing when a conversation was complete. Nathan came to supper that night, and Clara did not mention the aspen, and neither did he. They ate and talked about the territorial marshal's update on the Carver case. The man had been formally charged and was being held in Denver awaiting trial, and about the October arithmetic books, which had apparently been delayed at the St. Louis depot and were now expected in November, and about Maria Garza's youngest son Roberto, who had arrived in Clara's classroom 2 weeks after his brother Tomas, with the air of a child who had heard considerable things about this schoolteacher and intended to evaluate them personally. What's your verdict on him? Nathan asked. Sharp as a tack, Clara said. Resistant to authority on principle rather than by nature. He'll either be a lawyer or a significant amount of trouble. Can't it be both? In this territory, almost certainly. He smiled, the full smile, the one that had broken through in the kitchen and had been coming easier since. She was still not entirely accustomed to it, not because it was rare now, but because it had a quality she hadn't expected in a man who had worn a closed face for so long. It was young. It made him look younger, like something that had been put away carefully years ago and had come back out in good condition. I need to ask you something, he said. She set down her fork. The property, he said. My property. The cabin. She waited. I've been up there 11 years, he said. Built it the year I came to Colorado. Built it with the intention of... He stopped. I had different intentions at the time, about what kind of life I was building toward. He looked at the table. After Daniel, it became the place I stayed, not the place I was building toward anything. And now, she said. He looked up. I want to build toward something again. He held her gaze. But the cabin as it stands is a one-man cabin, and it is on a mountain, which is not where a school teacher's students live. She was very still. I'm not asking you to move up the mountain, he said. I want to be clear about that. I am asking something different. He picked up his knife and set it down. There's a piece of ground on the valley side, below the ridge above the town. Good flat land sheltered from the North Wind Creek access. I filed on it 3 years ago because it bordered my grazing allotment, and I didn't want anyone else filing on it. He paused. I've never built anything on it. She looked at him. I'd like to, he said. If you'd be willing to help me decide what to build. The kitchen was quiet. Nathan Cole, she said. Yes. Are you asking me to plan a house with you? I'm asking if you'd be willing to, he said. I recognize that's a considerable... Yes, she said. He stopped. Yes, she said again. I'll help you plan it. I have opinions about houses. I assumed you would, he said. I'll want a real kitchen, not a cooking corner. A kitchen. All right. And windows that face east. I like morning light. East windows, he said. Yes. And enough room for books. She looked at him. I have a considerable number of books. I've noticed, he said. You can have whatever you need for books. She picked up her fork again. He picked up his. They ate in a silence that had nothing empty in it. Outside the Colorado, summer was beginning its slow turn, the nights a degree cooler. Each week the angle of the afternoon light shifting by increments that you could only measure if you'd been paying attention long enough to notice the change. Clara had been paying attention. She had been in this valley 3 months now, and she knew the quality of the light at different times of day, the way she was coming to know most things here by direct experience, accumulated and sorted and held. She was staying. She had known it since she planted the herbs in the window box. She knew it more completely every day. The letter from Kansas City arrived on a Tuesday in the 3rd week of August. Clara recognized her mother's handwriting on the envelope before she even looked at the return address, and she stood in the post office for a moment holding it before she put it in her coat pocket and went back to the schoolhouse and finished the afternoon's lessons and waited until her students were gone. She read it at her desk. Her mother wrote the way she always wrote, in the formal, careful cursive of a woman who had been taught that letters were documents that every word committed to paper represented the writer and must therefore be chosen with care for how it would appear. The care made the letter feel managed even now, even when what it was saying was something her mother had not said before. Her father was unwell. Not critically, her mother was precise about this, not wanting to manipulate, which was itself a change from the woman Clara had left behind. A heart condition, the doctor said. Nothing immediately dangerous, but requiring rest and reduced strain. They had sold the house on Prospect Street and moved to a smaller place closer to her mother's sister. And then, at the bottom of the 3rd page, in the same careful cursive her mother had written, I understand you are teaching in Colorado Territory. Your cousin Margaret told us. I want you to know that your father and I think about you often. I want you to know that I know we asked too much of you for too long. I am not good at saying this kind of thing, and I may not say it well, but I am trying to say it. You were always the most capable person in our house, Clara. I think we used that against you when we should have been proud of it. I hope you are well. I hope you are somewhere you chose. Clara sat at her desk for a long time. She was somewhere she chose. She thought about how to explain that the stagecoach axle, the canyon, the juniper root, the sound of rope paying out above her, and how the accident that had stranded her here was the straightest line she had ever traveled to somewhere she actually wanted to be. She folded the letter and put it in her coat pocket. That evening she told Nathan about it. Not all of it at first. She gave him the facts the way she generally led, with facts before the rest. Her father's health, the house. She watched his face move through it, the specific attention he gave everything she said. Then she told him what her mother had written at the bottom. He was quiet for a moment. She said, "You were the most capable person in the house." He said, "Yes." "And she used it against you." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "My father used to say that about Daniel," he said. "That Daniel was too good for his own sake. That being the kind of man who told the truth was going to cost him." He paused. "He wasn't wrong. He was wrong that it was a reason to stop," Clara said. Nathan looked at her. "Yes," he said. "He was wrong about that." She folded her hands on the table. "I want to write back to her," she said. "I haven't decided everything I want to say, but I want to write back." "That sounds right," he said. "She said she hoped I was somewhere I chose." Clara looked at the table. "I want to tell her I am." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not gripping, just covering the way you'd cover something you wanted to keep from the cold. She turned her hand and held his. They sat like that for a while. The twist came, as the significant ones tend to, from a direction nobody had been watching. It was Hayes who brought it to Nathan on a Friday morning in early September, with the expression of a man delivering information he would rather not be delivering. Thomas Carver, awaiting trial in Denver, had made a deal. Clara heard it that afternoon, when Nathan came to the schoolhouse after her students left, and she knew from the way he came in, not his usual entry, which was unhurried, but something tighter, that it was not good news. "Tell me," she said. "Carver gave testimony to the territorial prosecutor," Nathan said, "against Sutton, full accounting of the scheme, how the documents were acquired, how Sutton planned to use them where Sutton was headed next." He stopped. "In exchange for reduced charges." "That sounds like good news," Clara said carefully. "The testimony is good. The problem is what Carver included in it." He sat down. There were other locations, other fraudulent claims that Sutton had acquired through Carver. 3 other counties in Colorado Territory and 2 in Wyoming. He looked at her. "And one of them is a water claim that affects a ranch in Carbon County, Wyoming, a ranch that belonged to my father." She went still. "Belonged," she said. "My father died 4 years ago," Nathan said. "Left the ranch to me. I've had a caretaker running it, a man named Overton, been there 20 years. I've been meaning to go back and deal with it properly, and I haven't." He looked at his hands. "Because going back meant going back." She understood what that meant. Wyoming was Daniel. Wyoming was the barn where the knot was taught, and the family supper table, and the years before the grief. "Sutton's claim," she said. "Is it filed?" "Not yet. Carver says Sutton had it next. Colorado first, then Wyoming. When Colorado failed, he was going to move to Wyoming before anyone connected the pattern." Nathan looked up. "The territorial prosecutor in Denver wants a representative of the affected Wyoming property to appear in Denver for the trial, to establish standing and confirm the fraudulent nature of the claim before it can be filed." He paused. "They want me there in 3 weeks." She looked at him. "Nathan," she said, this is good. If the claim is stopped before it's filed—" "I know," he said. "I know it's good. I know I need to go." He looked at the window, the east-facing window that caught the morning light. "I need to go to Denver, and I need to make decisions about the Wyoming property that I have been avoiding making for 4 years, because making them means accepting things I wasn't ready to accept." "Are you ready now?" she said. He was quiet for a long moment. "I think so," he said. "I think yes. I think I am." He looked at her. Something shifted Clara. in Denver, finding Daniel's name in that file. And then the junction. And then... He stopped. I'm not the same man who went up that mountain to disappear. I'm not sure when that changed. I know approximately when it started. She looked at him steadily. What are you going to do about the Wyoming ranch? She said. If you go back, what do you actually want to do with it? He thought about it carefully, the way he thought about things that mattered. Sell it, he said, properly to someone who will work it, not let it sit with a caretaker while I pretend I'll go back someday. He paused. And use what it brings to build on the valley ground. She held his gaze. The house, she said. The house, he said, with the east windows and the kitchen and the room for your books. The schoolroom was very quiet. How long will you be in Denver? She said. A week for the trial testimony. Then however long it takes to arrange the Wyoming sale properly, a month at most, if Overton can manage the particulars on his end. 6 weeks, she said. Maybe less. She nodded slowly. Then go, she said. Go and do what needs doing. I'll write, he said. Every few days. I expect you to, she said. I'll write back. He stood. He crossed to where she was standing at the front of the schoolroom, and he took her face in his hands the way he had in the kitchen. Careful, certain, and he kissed her once clean and complete, and she held the front of his shirt with both hands and then let go. Nathan, she said. Yes. The valley ground, she said. While you're gone, would you have any objection to my walking the boundaries? He looked at her. I know where the stakes are, she said. Ida showed me the property map. I just want to understand the space. Think about where things might go. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face was the full weight of what she was actually saying. Not just the ground, but the future on the ground, the thing they were both building toward in the space between every conversation they'd had since a canyon and a rope and a juniper root. Walk it as much as you want, he said. It's going to be your ground too. She let out a breath she hadn't quite known she was holding. Go, she said. Come home. He left. He wrote every 4 days, which she had not quite believed he would manage, and which she should have known better than to doubt. The letters were short and specific, and entirely his, no wasted words, no performance, the prose of a man who said what he meant and stopped when he was done. The first letter described Denver. The trial proceedings, the prosecutor's office. Carver's testimony delivered with the flat, factual tone of a man trading truth for leniency. The Sutton claims in 3 Colorado counties and 2 Wyoming counties were formally flagged as fraudulent and entered into the court record. Nathan's appearance on behalf of the Wyoming ranch property had taken one morning and established standing with the efficiency Hayes had predicted. The second letter was from Wyoming. He had gone back. He had not specified in advance that he was going. The letter had a different quality from the Denver ones, slower, like a man writing while he was still finding his footing. The ranch is in good shape. Overton is a careful man, and I've done him a disservice by not acknowledging that properly in 4 years. The stock is healthy. The main house needs work on the south side, but it's sound. I walked the property this morning. I stood in the barn where Daniel taught me to tie the knot. I stood there for a long time. I don't know exactly what I was doing. Saying something maybe? I think I said it. The mountains here are different from yours. I called them mine for 11 years, but I think they were always yours. I'll explain that when I'm back. I told Overton I'll be listing the property in October. He said he'd been expecting it and had a buyer already in mind. A family from Ohio, 3 sons, the kind of people who'll work it. He was not surprised. He knew before I did, apparently. Walk the east boundary if you haven't. The light there in the morning is what I want you to see first. She read that letter 4 times. She walked the east boundary the following morning in the early light and stood where he had told her to stand and understood what he meant. She wrote back that afternoon and told him so. The third letter was shorter. Coming home Thursday. Sale paperwork signed. Overton is satisfied. Denver trial concluded. Carver sentenced Sutton's warrants active in 4 territories. Hayes will have the official notice by the time you read this. I have been thinking about the east-facing windows. I think there should be 3 of them. I have other thoughts about the house, but they can wait until I'm back. Clara. I have been thinking about something else also. It can wait until I'm back, but I want you to know I've been thinking about it. She held that letter in both hands and read the last paragraph 3 times. She knew what he had been thinking about. She had been thinking about it too. He rode into Harlan's Crossing on a Thursday afternoon earlier than she expected, while she was still at the schoolhouse with her students. She heard brokers' hooves on the main street, and she made herself finish the lesson fractions. The older students, a concept Roberto Garza was engaging with as if it were a personal adversary, and she dismissed her students at the proper time, and not 1 minute before, and she walked out of the schoolhouse into the September afternoon. He was leaning against the hitching post across the street. He had been waiting. She crossed toward him, and he straightened, and when she was close enough, he looked at her with an expression that was simple in the way that things become simple after enough complexity, a man who knew what he wanted and had come home to say so. "You're early," she said. "I rode fast," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. "You said you had something to tell me," she said. "In your letter." "I do," he said. She waited. He reached into his coat pocket and brought out something small. She looked at it, before she looked at him, a ring plain gold. The kind of ring that made no argument for itself, except that it was real and had been chosen. "This was my mother's," he said. "I've carried it since she died. I don't know why I kept carrying it. I wasn't thinking about this, not consciously. But it was always there." He looked at the ring in his palm. "In Wyoming, standing in that barn, I finally understood why." She looked at him. "Clara Whitmore," he said. "You are the most capable person I have ever known. You are also the most honest and the most steady and the most willing to go over the edge when something needs doing." He stopped. "I have been alone on a mountain for 3 years, and you have been alive somewhere, not knowing what you were going to do with yourself, and somehow the exact right accident put us both on that ridge at the exact right moment." He looked at her directly. "I don't believe in accidents anymore." She could not speak for a moment. "I know this is fast," he said. "It is not fast," she said, and her voice was steady, which surprised her. 11 years of building toward something, and 3 years of running away, and 600 miles on a stagecoach in a canyon, and 3 months in this town is not fast, Nathan. That is a considerable amount of arriving." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Yes, that's exactly right." "Ask me," she said. "Will you marry me?" he said. Simply, without ornament, the way he said everything that mattered. "Yes," she said. "I will marry you." He put the ring on her finger. She looked at it on her hand. Her mother's ring, which had traveled from Wyoming in a coat pocket, through a barn full of grief, and back to the light of a September afternoon in Colorado territory. She pressed it against her palm with her thumb, and felt the weight of it, which was slight, and the weight of what it meant, which was considerable. He took her hand and held it. They stood on the main street of Harlan's Crossing in the full afternoon light, and Cord Birch, passing on the opposite boardwalk, stopped and looked, and then grinned and kept walking, and Mrs. Calloway appeared in the window of the general store for approximately 4 seconds before disappearing. And Ida Marsh. Clara was nearly certain was watching from the direction of the feed store, with the expression of a woman who had expected this and was noting that her expectations had been confirmed. "Ida is watching," Clara said. "I know," Nathan said. "I told her I was going to ask you today." Clara looked at him. "I told Frank too," he said. "And Hayes. And Sam at the livery." She stared at him. "You told the entire town," she said. "I told the people who mattered," he said. "Which in a town this size is approximately the same thing." She laughed, the real kind again, the deep kind, the kind that had been coming easier every week until now. It came without warning, and she was grateful for it every time. "Nathan Cole," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She shook her head. She kept holding his hand. They were married in October in the Harlan's Crossing Church on a Saturday, when the aspen on the mountain had gone gold, and the morning light came sharp and clear through the east-facing windows of every building in the valley. The church was full. Every family who had stood at the creek junction was there. Maria Garza sat in the front row with all 4 of her sons, including Roberto, who had been promised that if he sat still through the ceremony, he could be the one to ring the church bell after. Cord Birch and his wife sat beside Pete Callahan, and his and Frank and Ida Marsh sat up front on Clara's side, Ida wearing the good hat she reserved for civic occasions of the first importance. Walt Hayes stood with Nathan. There was no one else Nathan had considered asking Hayes, who had ridden to a creek junction in the middle of the night, on the word of a man he barely knew, had earned whatever was being offered. Clara walked in on her own. This was not a deficiency. There was no one here from her family, not yet, though she had written to her mother, and her mother had written back a letter that Clara had read 3 times, and then kept in the kitchen drawer under the arithmetic books. Her mother would come in the spring, she had written. If Clara would have her. Clara would have her. She walked in on her own because she had been walking in on her own for a long time, and she knew how to do it, and because the man at the end of the aisle was watching her come toward him, with an expression that she understood now as fully as she understood anything. The full face, nothing closed, nothing managed, just Nathan Cole. In the morning light, looking at her like she was the most solid thing in his world. She reached him. He took her hand. The minister said the words. They said the words. Outside the mountain held its position the way mountains do, indifferent and constant, the same granite and aspen and snowmelt creek that had been there before any of them arrived, and would be there after. But inside the church, among these people, in this valley, on this specific October morning, something was happening that the mountain could not account for. The particular thing that happens when 2 people who have both been lost find each other and choose deliberately and with full knowledge of the cost to stay found. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Roberto Garza ran for the bell rope before the minister had finished the sentence. The bell rang. It rang for a long time enthusiastically with the energy of a 7-year-old boy who had been promised this particular task and intended to execute it thoroughly. Nathan looked at Clara. "He's going to be a lawyer," Nathan said. "Or considerable trouble," Clara said. "Both," they said together. They built the house on the valley ground the following spring, when the snow pulled back from the lower elevation and the ground was workable. Nathan did the framing himself with Frank Marsh and Cord Birch, and Pete Callahan's 2 sons coming out on Saturdays with tools and opinions about how walls should go. Clara worked alongside them on the days the schoolhouse didn't need her, which was not as many days as she would have preferred, but more than Nathan expected. 3 east-facing windows. A real kitchen. A room for books that turned out to need 2 walls of shelving by the time the arithmetic books arrived from St. Louis and were joined by the other things Clara owned that she had been keeping in crates at Ida's feed store since she arrived. The November arithmetic books, still late from the St. Louis depot, arrived in February of the following year, which was also the month Clara's mother arrived from Kansas City for a visit that was supposed to be 2 weeks and turned into 6. Her mother was not what Nathan had expected. He had built a picture from what Clara had described, the managed letters, the years of misdirected expectation, and the picture was not wrong, but it was incomplete in the way that pictures of people built from their worst moments are always incomplete. Eleanor Whitmore was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who assessed everything she encountered with a speed and thoroughness that Clara had clearly inherited directly. She walked through the new house on her first morning and said nothing for a long time, and then said the east windows were the right choice. As if she had been consulted and her recommendation had been followed. "Clara chose them," Nathan said. Eleanor looked at him. Then she looked at her daughter. Then she said, yes, she would. It was, Clara told Nathan later, the most her mother had ever said about her with the fewest words. He understood this. He had a similar economy himself. Eleanor stayed 6 weeks. She taught Roberto Garza to play chess, which had the effect of making him somewhat more formidable and somewhat more willing to sit still in exchange for intellectual challenge. She helped Clara organize the book room and expressed opinions about the shelving that Nathan silently incorporated into the second wall, without comment. On her last evening, she sat at the kitchen table with Nathan, while Clara was outside saying goodnight to the mayor, and she said, "You went over a cliff for her." "Yes, ma'am," he said, "before you knew her." "Yes." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "My husband would not have done that," she said. "He is a good man. He is careful with what matters to him, but he would have stood at the edge and calculated." She looked at her hands. "I spent 40 years with a man who calculated, and I calculated along with him, and we were very safe, and we asked too much of our daughter because she was the one who seemed like she could do without." She stopped. "I was wrong about that." Nathan said nothing. "Thank you," Eleanor said, "for not calculating." He looked at her. "She would have found her way," he said, "with or without me." "I know," Eleanor said. "That's not the point." He thought about it. "No," he said. "I suppose it isn't." Clara came back in and found them at the table and looked between them with the expression of a woman assessing a situation and deciding it did not require intervention. "Tea," she said. "Please," said Eleanor. "Please," said Nathan. Clara put the kettle on. Years move the way they do in mountain country. Not slowly, not fast, but with a quality of completeness. Each season fully itself before the next one arrived. The schoolhouse had 22 students by the third year, then 28 by the fifth, and Clara went to the town council for a second teacher, and got one, a young woman from Ohio named Bess, who arrived with 3 crates of books, and the energy of someone who had just discovered what she was supposed to do with herself, which Clara recognized as a reliable sign. Nathan trained horses. He had always trained horses up on the mountain for himself, and occasionally for others, but now he did it as the thing. It actually was a livelihood, a craft, the specific skill of a man who understood how animals thought and could make that understanding useful. Valley families brought him horses, then families from 2 counties over. Then eventually a letter from a man in Denver who had heard from a man in Cheyenne who had heard from someone whose horse Nathan had worked with in the spring of 1880. He wrote back. He took the work. He hired 2 hands. The mountain cabin he kept. He didn't sell it, didn't tear it down, didn't let it fall into disrepair. He went up there sometimes when the particular quality of the solitude was what he needed, not the solitude of running the old kind, the kind that had been a form of dying, but the solitude of a man who had enough inside him that being alone with it was not frightening. He would go up for a day sometimes too and come back down, and Clara would look at his face when he came through the door and know from the quality of what she saw there that he had gone up empty of something and come back full. She never asked what he worked through up there. He never explained. This was one of the ways they fit. One evening in the summer of their 4th year, they rode up the mountain together for the first time. Nathan had asked her once in the first year if she wanted to see the cabin, and she had said not yet, and he had accepted this without asking why. The why was simple. She had been building herself into this valley and this life, and she wanted to be stable in it before she saw the place where he had gone to stop living. She wanted to go there from a position of fullness rather than curiosity. They rode up in the long summer evening, the light going gold on the aspen. He showed her the cabin smaller than she had pictured. More weathered, the aspen cut back now but still close, still holding the place in a kind of embrace that was not quite domestic and not quite wild. She stood inside it for a moment. The table where 2 cups had once sat, the shelf where he had put them, the single window that had not faced east. "This is where you were," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at it, looked at him. "It's a good cabin," she said. "It kept me alive," he said. "Until I could figure out how to do something better than just staying alive." She took his hand. They walked out together, and she stood at the rim of the canyon, where her story in this territory had started, and she looked down at the valley, below the creek, the town, the schoolhouse roof, the house with the east windows that caught the morning light, and she held Nathan's hand and felt the full weight of how far she had traveled to arrive at this specific place. "You can see the schoolhouse from here," she said. "Clear day," he said. "You can see the house too." She looked. She could see both. "Nathan," she said. "Yes. Your brother chose right," she said. "He chose to tell the truth when it would have been easier not to. And it cost him, and that was not fair, and it was not his fault, and it should not have happened." She paused. "But the person that truth was told to, the investigator who wrote it down, that record, is the reason you went to Denver. And Denver is why we have the house." She was quiet for a moment. "Daniel built this, in a way. He built this by being the kind of man who told the truth." Nathan stood very still beside her. "I've thought about that," he said. "I know you have," she said. He looked at the canyon below them, at the 300-foot drop where a juniper tree had once held the weight of a woman for just long enough. He looked at the creek in the valley. He looked at the house. "Come on," he said. "It's getting dark." They rode back down the mountain together side by side, where the trail was wide enough, single file, where it wasn't the way they did most things, sometimes together. Sometimes one in front and one behind, but always in the knowledge of each other, always moving in the same direction. The stars came out before they reached the valley floor. The mountain behind them held its position the way it always had and always would, stone and silence and the long patient indifference of things that have no need to be otherwise. But in the valley the lights were on in the house with the east windows. And in the house there were books on 2 walls and a kitchen that was a real kitchen, and a ring on Clara Whitmore's finger that had traveled from a barn in Wyoming through 3 years of solitude and a canyon and a rope and a fraudulent water claim and a Tuesday night with the Henderson records in a strongbox to land exactly where it was always going to land. Nathan came through the door first and lit the lamp. Clara came in behind him and put her coat on the hook and went to the kitchen, and he heard the familiar sounds of her moving through the space that was theirs. The sounds he had learned so well, they had become part of the sound of being home. He sat at the table. 2 cups. He had stopped noticing that there were always 2 cups, because there had always been 2 cups for long enough that the absence of 2 cups would have been the thing that registered as wrong. He thought about the single cup, the years of the single cup. The morning he had taken a second cup off the shelf and set it on the table empty, not knowing what he was doing, knowing only that something in him refused to pretend anymore that 1 cup was the right number. "Coffee," Clara said from the kitchen. "Please," he said. She brought 2 cups and set them down and sat across from him. The way she had sat across from him the first night, in this same configuration, at a table where he had made her supper after pulling her off a canyon wall. Except that night, the cups had been tin, and now they were ceramic, and she had chosen them, and the table had been his, and now was theirs. And the room had been quiet, with the specific quiet of a man who lived alone, and now was quiet with the specific quiet of 2 people who had learned each other's silences and found them habitable. "What are you thinking about?" she said. "The cup," he said. "The empty cup I put on the table the night I brought you down from the canyon." She looked at him. "I didn't know I was doing it," he said. "I think I did it before I understood what it meant." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "What did it mean?" He looked at her across the table, at the woman who had held a juniper root above a 300-foot drop, and looked up at a stranger and said, "Help me," in the steadiest voice he had ever heard, who had sent a letter to the Henderson daughter before she told him about it, who had walked 3 valley roads in the dark and come back with 3 families, who had stood beside him in the street and let him say the thing about Daniel and not tried to fix it. "It meant," he said, "that I already knew." She looked at him with the full, clear look that was simply her, no performance, no management, just Clara, present and exact. "Knew what?" she said. "That 1 cup was never going to be enough again," he said. She held his gaze. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, the way he had put his hand over hers when she read her mother's letter. Not gripping, just covering, just there. They drank their coffee. Outside, the Colorado night went on being itself vast and dark, and full of the particular mountain silence that Nathan Cole had once gone up into to disappear, and had instead, by the grace of a woman's scream in a canyon, and his own inability to calculate at the critical moment, used to find his way back. The mountain had not given him his happiness. The mountain was where he had stopped being afraid to want it, and that, in the end, was more than enough. It was everything. 2 people, 2 cups, a lamp in the window of a house with east-facing windows, and the long, steady life of 2 survivors who had chosen every single day since a summer canyon in 1878 to be more than just people who had made it through. They had made it home,